You might make a self-deprecating joke about riding the hot mess express or saving for your kid's future therapy. But the truth is, behind the closed doors of the therapy room, so many women share that they are feeling like they're a bad mom, and there's nothing funny about it. Today, we get honest about that feeling. I'm a bad mom. Why do so many of us feel this way or fear it? And how can we free ourselves from the sense that we're failing at our most important role to date? Hey, Jess.
Hey, Andrea.
So, we get ideas for the podcast pretty much everywhere. Sometimes we're reading something or we're talking about something. Sometimes it shows up in our therapy room. But the idea for this podcast actually came to me in the grocery store.
Ooh,
Yeah.
tell me more.
So I was checking out at our local grocery store and I heard someone call my name. Andrea, is that you? And I turned around and I saw my children's preschool teacher. I'm going to say her name because she is a saint and the world should know it, Mrs. Larson. And she just truly was one of those people who just does such an amazing job with your children. We were chatting for a minute and she said, "How are you?" She's like, "You look really good. You look happy." And I felt in that moment just so many different things because at the time of our lives that Mrs. Larson was in our lives, I was not happy. I was very firmly in my early motherhood, kind of falling apart, bad mom stage. I feel I'm getting choked up about it right now.
I know I am too, as you say it.
Yeah. It meant a lot to be able to look at her and to nod and say, I am. I'm good. We're good. But it stuck with me, man. And we can't start our episode here. Like we started it here. We're going to dig into that really personal stuff as we get to the end of the episode. But it made me want to dig into this idea that we hear everywhere in our everyday lives in so many different ways, whether it's a joke or it's a heart cry, like a sense that I'm a bad mom. So, but before we jump into that, we have a business to take care of. So, friends, listeners, this is about to be a really honest conversation, a really raw and vulnerable one. And if you love conversations like this, which we assume that you do because you're here, would you please leave a review for the podcast? We're working so hard to grow this show, and not just the show, but a community of other honest people who want to bring all of this empathy and insight and laughter and slight inappropriateness to conversations with one another, building a Facebook community. And we're hoping to have some real life connection in the fall. But one of the first things that a new listener does when they look at our podcast is they check to see how many reviews and what the rating is. And you guys don't know this because this data is not available anywhere else, but we have almost 50,000 downloads for our first year here as a podcast.
It's huge.
It's huge. It's a huge. That's a big number in podcasting, but we only have 86 tiny little reviews.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah. Now, there's no shame in this game. I'm a podcast junkie, but I almost never leave a review. But now that I know how much it means to the people who do the podcast and how much it means for the podcast, I'm committing to doing more reviews, leaving a rating. So just asking you guys to do the same. You can leave a rating in like 0.2 seconds. But if you would take a minute to leave a review, we might even feature your review on the show.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So last night, I was out with a group of moms and I told them we were going to be recording this and asked them just casually, when was the last time that they felt like a bad mom? And to a one, every single person said, like, you mean like in the last hour or, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's that self-deprecating joke that we all make.
Bad mom.
Bad mom.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a bad mom. I did this. I'm a bad mom. I forgot snacks. I'm a bad mom. My kids said I'm a bad mom because I did this or that. But it's just become part of how we talk about ourselves sometimes. And it made me curious, where do you think this idea of being a bad mom came from?
I would love to look at the history of that from because it's pop culture,
Hmm.
right? From the movies to the terms. I mean, I'm assuming it was somewhere on the internet, but it has become a self-deprecating term, right?
Yeah.
Where you call yourself a bad mom, everybody laughs, but truly behind the laughter is usually a mom who's feeling really bad about something that she did and is
Hmm.
using humor to avoid talking about something difficult.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that it's almost like a term that we've grabbed onto to stand, I guess, in opposition to this idea of the perfect mom,
Yeah.
while at the same time having internalized this idea that we need to be perfect moms, right? There's a real push pull there. And I think that we are a generation of moms, are the first generation of moms who grew up with social media and the
Mhm.
internet.
Well, and I think yes, that is a big one. But then the hyper focus on positivity was
Hmm.
really injected into us. I mean, if you look at just kind of the 90s where pop culture started to trend towards, then in the 2000s where it was just this whole create a positive environment. And it's led to this idea that you can't fail. I mean, you
Mm.
can, but it's going to mess you up. It's going to mess your kids up. You can't get it wrong. So there's this hyper focus with women on getting it not right, but being perfect. So
Yes.
things don't go wrong.
Yes. And I do think that as a mom, that sense was really laid down in me with all of the internet based, like, remember BabyCenter? Did
I
you
do.
ever
I do
use
remember
that website?
BabyCenter.
Or the
Yeah,
Bump?
I do remember those.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You had
taking me
the
back.
yeah, you had the apps and the website. This is in the earlier days of the internet before a lot of social media. And there was just a sense with all the information that was being dumped on us that every moment of our child's development was critical, even
Hmm.
in utero, and that everything that we did forever would have an impact forever. So I feel like when we were inundated with this information through every moment of our parenting journey, I started to really internalize the idea that there was a right and wrong way to do things. Did you
Oh,
feel
yeah.
that as well?
Well, it's funny because yes, but as you guys know, I'm not a huge podcast junkie. I'm trending towards that. Like
Mhm.
I'm listening to more, but I have always been like kind of good at not over consuming information.
Mhm.
However, when I started in that early motherhood, it was actually every other mother that I talked to that was talking about this book or this app or this thing. And that actually made me feel horrible because I didn't know anything they were talking about.
Yes. Yeah, it was I recently read a term and I thought it was so freaking spot on. It was that we are have become a generation of responsibilized parents who see the need for learning in order to be able to raise our children correctly, or at least according to the latest scientific findings. And
Yeah.
so there was a sense that like everyone's an expert. You need to know everything, and we all know everything. And then there's that fun little thing where, your neighbor Sally says, "Well, the right way to do things is to breastfeed." And then your neighbor Jane says, "No, fed is best." And then your neighbor, like, I'm just making up the weirdest names.
I
We're
know.
going to say Jen because I was going to say Carla. I was like, what is
Like,
happening right
what
now?
generation are you
I
in
don't
right
know.
now?
I got distracted. But, then your other neighbor would say, "No, formula allows for this, that, and the other thing." Or you'd have, the articles on attachment parenting and then the articles on sleep training. And you're going like, holy shit.
Well, because
I'm
they all
hearing,
contradict each other.
yes, they all contradict each other. And so you're getting this message all the time. You need to learn. You need to learn all the time. You need to learn more. You need to get it right because everything that you're doing right now has a lifelong impact. There's absolutely no room for getting it wrong. Oh, also, by the way, it's either this or the opposite, like, and you have to choose. Good
Which
luck.
Which is so funny because if you really, really dig into the research, that is not true. Getting it wrong, like, does not lead to all of these outside of like true neglect and starvation, like those like core things,
Right.
but it's actually bullshit.
No, I totally agree. And yet, it's this kind of pop psychology, short form content stuff now that throws terms like attachment and whatever else they want to throw into it. It makes it sound very official. And then that is always connected with somebody's position or
Mhm.
sometimes something that they're trying to sell. And so there's so much fear mongering and there's so much tribalism. It's like, this is the only way. This is my whole identity is that I didn't sleep train or
Mhm.
that I only breastfed. And people are just feeding the same thing. When you're right, that's just really not borne out in real life, but we're
Mm-mm.
afraid of it.
No, and if we know anything, it's that hard situations and getting things wrong actually builds resiliency in the real world.
Right.
And taking that away and not getting it wrong and never getting it wrong actually will screw your kid
Hmm.
later on because they will not build any resiliency. I
Hmm.
mean, even as we talk through it, it makes me so angry because I have drank that Kool-Aid for so damn long, even because it's emotion based,
Yep.
even though logically I know it's bullshit and it's all marketing.
Right. Yes. It's so true. And this sense of or blaming of women and mothers for everything and making women and mothers feel like everything that could go right or wrong with your kids is your fault has a
Mhm.
long history. Like that is not
Oh, yeah.
modern. That is back to Freud and I'm sure back to the Stone Ages, right? But psychology for a long time has said everything that happens with your child is on your shoulders and everything bad about them or good that they do is because of you. It's this causal relationship, this one-way street kind of thing where pop psychology especially and our, modern day culture is saying that whatever you do, mom, is going to have an impact forever and this is a tale as old as time.
Yes, it is. It's not a new message.
Mm-mm.
And it's created a lot of stress and anxiety in new moms.
Mm-hmm. And then it's reinforced by mom groups.
Oh, yeah. I got lots to say on that
Yeah.
one.
Do you want to say something on that one?
I mean, maybe. Well, I don't know if it's something that you're going to want to get into a little bit later, but I feel like the whole mom group is what kind of took me down a really hard path,
Mm-hmm.
and not from a place of blaming the mom group, but more not trusting myself, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
not having the confidence in myself. But man, the whole mom group and telling me what I should and should not do really made my experience as a new mom hard.
Yes. Yeah. We've been separated from our intuition with
Hmm.
so much information. And because we're all so fucking scared about getting it right, we defend our choices by telling other people that they have to make the same choices as us. And so it's even now like, even as we have older kids, the same stuff is still happening, right? It starts when they're little tiny babies, but it continues forever with, especially mom focused groups. There's as much like hate and
Oh yeah.
criticism in there as there is support. And there's a lot of both.
I would definitely argue that there tends to be nowadays, I see more criticism
Yeah.
from a place of defense where you should do this, which now stepping outside of it and not being in that
Hmm.
early stage of motherhood any longer, now I see how much fear
Hmm.
is there. And it's really a group of women who are trying to get it right, are terrified of getting it wrong, which then leads to turning on one another. Well,
Yeah,
you should do it this way. You should breastfeed. You should, it's all fear
it
based.
is. And then it's backed up with pop psychology terms.
Correct. Because you can find evidence to
Hmm.
support whatever the hell you want to
Hmm.
nowadays.
Yep. Yeah. It's super toxic. But it's not just the expectations that are like foisted upon us by our culture. We all came into motherhood with an idealized expectation for what a mom should be, which was often completely unknown to us or under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was in my early motherhood years, I was writing quite a bit and blogging, which makes me feel
Me too.
like baby internet days, right?
Which is so funny. Yeah.
I know. And I was reflecting on this for a moment and I realized that, you know, that Bible passage that like everyone reads at their weddings, love is patient, love is kind, does not
Oh, that I
envy, does not
refuse
boast, is not
to.
proud.
Yeah. I was like,
Yeah,
absolutely not. Yeah.
I know. Well, yeah, but we all kind of know it. Even if you're not religious, you've probably heard it
Mm-hmm.
before. And I realized that I was walking around with this internalized sense that like I could replace the word love by mom. Mom is
Ooh.
patient. Mom is kind. Mom does not envy. Mom does not boast. Mom is not proud. And on it goes. That I had this really high expectation for myself to be perfect. And that's where I started my motherhood journey. Did you have expectations that you put on yourself for what a mother should be?
I put expectations on myself, but I also put them on my child.
Mhm.
I remember like thinking about how those early days would go, like sipping my coffee, just holding my beautiful baby, watching
Mhm.
the Today Show, and just being in bliss.
Mhm.
She'd be happy, I'd be happy, like it would be perfect.
Yeah.
And it was unrealistic for her and I.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so when she was screaming, when she was crying, when a mom would say, wait a minute, she's not on a schedule. You have to put her on a schedule. Everybody wants a
Mhm.
schedule. And I was like, why isn't she on a schedule? I'm a bad mom. I don't even know
Mhm.
that baby should be on schedules. And the questioning, right? So I will say my expectations for being a mom were probably unrealistic,
Mhm.
but they didn't get bad until after I actually became a mom, and it was hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Everything changes when that little human appears. And this is where it gets pretty personal and where we'll get a little bit personal. Once those humans appeared and we started to have our early motherhood experiences, I think this is where this idea of being a bad mom started to take root, at least for me.
I think
Part of
it's
that.
Yeah, I think a big part too for me, and just the timing of things of what was going on in my life at that time, but this whole quest for why
Mhm.
really stuck with me. So why is she crying? Why is she not happy? Why is she not sleeping through the night?
Mhm.
Why? And the problem with modern day society is you can find 80,000 reasons why,
Right.
but oftentimes the reason is just because it's a baby
Right.
and you're a new mom trying to just navigate this really hard thing, often on your own.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't know what we're doing. It's our first time because we haven't grown up in a generational, multi generational household. We didn't see baby after baby after baby and what they were like. We didn't experience, I mean, I really thought that all my work as a babysitter had paid off and, would have prepared me for motherhood. It didn't.
Oh, heck no.
And so I just think that we go into it completely unprepared. And that's normal, but it can make us feel like we're failing, like we're falling short
Mhm.
and that we're inadequate.
And I think there's so much that's done in isolation, right? And that's where the internet became so problematic, that instead of calling your mom, your aunt, your grandmother, your best friend, whatnot, you go to the World Wide Web. I
Mhm.
know I did, or I bought another damn book.
Mhm.
And it was somebody else's words, not real life experience. And when
Mhm.
I look back at the mom groups at that time, none of us were sharing somebody else's like experience. Like, my mom has assisted me, or my sister or my friend. It was, I read this book and this expert told me this, over and over and over. And what you had was a group of women trying to read 85,000 books to get it right, but there
Mhm.
was no real honest connection or conversation with those who have come before us, or those that were with us at in that moment going
Yeah,
through the same thing.
those people who would know you and know your baby too.
It actually makes me really sad looking back
Mhm.
at it.
Mhm. Yeah. And that was our entrance to the experience of the role of mom. You don't know what you're doing. Everyone else seems to know what they're doing. You're stuck with that anxiety. Why is this happening? Some of us had very difficult babies. So I think that when, let's say your first baby, like mine, was a colicky baby, that question of why, what am I doing wrong becomes incessant. And then some of us, like myself, struggled with postpartum depression or anxiety after we had our babies. And it felt personal. So the very brief overview is that I had a birth for my first baby that I would describe as traumatic because I believed and had a reason to believe that he might die during our birth. And I ended up with an emergency C-section, and I ended up with a bright blue baby when they finally pulled him out, and bad APGAR scores, right? You fail your first test as a mom. There we go. I was supposed to bring him safely into this world and I failed. That's what I thought. And what I didn't know at the time is that when you have a baby, every woman goes through this. When you're pregnant, you have estrogen and progesterone on the rise, like a rocket to the moon, which means that you have serotonin working nicely in your body. You have dopamine. So that means that you're happy and you're calm and you're peaceful. And then you birth a baby, and overnight you essentially go into menopause. I mean, that's the hormonal levels.
Mm-hmm.
This is on a good day, right? But you add in a traumatic birth. And then for me, you added in a colicky baby. And all I could think was, I failed. I broke him. My baby is broken because I failed. There's something wrong with him. There's something wrong with me. And you don't sleep. And when your hormones are in the gutter, sometimes you end up with depression. Thank God my stepmom came in. She took one look at me a couple weeks after the baby was born and was like, "This is not okay." She said to my husband, she's not okay. Are you? And he was like, "I don't know." So she took me to the doctor, got on medication that flipped the light switch back on, and I was okay. But I still had those thoughts that I had failed, that I was bad at this. I hated it. I didn't like being a mom. I didn't like being screamed at. I did not, I didn't like it. And then I felt so, so bad. And for me, that continued for years, all the way up until, my kids were in preschool with the most blessed preschool teacher ever. And I remember, my colicky child was difficult. He was highly sensitive. That was why he was crying all the time. None of the parenting books worked. He needed the exact opposite of everything that I was reading at the time. I didn't know it. And I felt so responsible for how he behaved and how I didn't know what I was doing. And we went in for a conference and she was saying all these beautiful things about him and then saying, I think he'd really benefit from some routines at home. And I just fucking burst into tears. There I was with like my probably almost 5-year-old, my 3-year-old, my baby, probably wearing the baby, probably covered in spit up, haven't slept, don't have an identity outside of being home with my kids, feel like I'm failing at this job, feel like I'm bad at everything. And it really wasn't until I started seeing a therapist after I had my third baby, 3 postpartum experiences, that I started to untangle. some of this story, that I was a bad mom. And it's taken years of work for me to do that. And I think the reason that I'm sharing it is because there are so many women who experience postpartum depression or anxiety. It's closer to 1 in 5 now. And even when you don't, like we were saying before, so many women who experience a sense of failing at this job. And it's not true, but it hurts and it sticks until you start to examine it. I'm wondering if you have any of those early motherhood type experiences that you felt.
You know, it's interesting because I had a really easy birth, actually, which, funny enough, I rarely say because I get ridiculed, maybe not
Mm,
ridiculed, but I don't like to say it because so many people have bad stories, um, that I get like, oh gosh, of course you do. That's the
mhm,
typical. And I was like, well, that's unfair. However, because I had such an easy birth, I became the mom in the hospital that had the easy birth. So after 24 hours of not moving out of my bed, finally a medical professional said, "How many times have you gotten up?" And I said, "I haven't. I'm in too much pain."
mhm,
And they said, "Nobody's asked you." And I said, "No, everybody walks in and are like, we heard about you. You had such a great birth, such an easy birth."
mm,
And nobody asked me how I was, not a single person.
mhm,
So I laid in that bed for over 24 hours before I moved my body, thinking
mm,
that's what I was supposed to do.
mhm,
It was horrible. It was horrible. And I could go on and on about the care that I received in that hospital, because I didn't have a harder experience.
mhm,
Because I didn't have a hard experience, they also refused to ever take the baby out of the room. I did not sleep for 2 days,
mm,
literally no sleep, to the point where I thought I was going insane by the time we were supposed to leave the hospital.
mhm,
But
mhm,
again, I thought it was normal.
mhm.
Babies don't sleep. That's what you're supposed to do. So starting off in that home, I was a wreck,
Yeah.
mostly because I did not sleep. For 2 days, I did
Mhm,
not sleep. And then I really never slept again. I mean, it took so long. It's just interesting to reflect back on
mhm.
how much I did not know and how much I did know that was completely pointless,
Right.
right? Like I studied which baby carrier
Mhm.
to freaking buy because that's what everybody told me to do. Nobody told me how to advocate for myself in the hospital.
Right.
Nobody told me that I needed to get sleep or I was setting myself up for like major mental health struggles.
Mhm.
Nobody. I will also argue that I guess I didn't ask that type of, I don't know. I didn't
Right.
ask, but you better believe I got a lot of advice. I remember getting a spreadsheet from some person on, or one of a friend at a time, on every single piece of baby equipment and what's the best and why it's the best. Like spreadsheets long, but nobody told me the importance of sleep.
Mhm.
Nobody told me that a baby that is crying is hard.
Yeah. Yes. And then because we've seen all these images of beautiful moms with their beautiful babies on the internet, and we have these unexamined expectations of who we are and what we will be, it's so easy to feel like you failed. It's so easy to be like, you know, you get that casual brush off. Well, babies don't sleep. Welcome to the club. And you're like, well, everyone else can deal with this. Why can't I? And I think for many of us, that is the root of this feeling of being a bad mom. So I mentioned earlier how psychology has a long history of just like shitting on moms and saying that we're responsible for every terrible thing that could happen and every good thing that could happen in our children's lives. But I wanted to let you guys know about a concept in psychology that's actually helpful.
Ooh,
Yeah, I know. What a
I'm excited.
fancy that.
I'm like,
What a concept. Right.
woohoo.
So the concept is called a good enough mother.
Mm.
And this was proposed or written about by the British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. And it was proposed in 1953. And he basically said that even when mothers don't meet all of their children's needs, they can still be good enough that their children survive those, quote, quote, mistakes unscathed. And this was a direct response to the Freudian notion that childhood events would haunt you forever, basically. And I loved this, although I did not love it when I first heard it. And so I'm wondering what your gut reaction was to the idea of being good enough.
Okay. I chuckle because my first thought was, of course, a guy said it because no way a woman or a mom would allow herself to just be good enough. That
Right.
was my honest gut response.
Hmm. Yeah. So there's almost a sense of good enough is not good enough. Is that what you're saying?
100%. And it's a little bit of like a mind fuck in a way,
Hmm.
with that whole notion of good enough. I actually think you should be a good enough mother and not a perfect one
Hmm.
for your children.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's not only true that you will be a good enough mother, but it's vitally important, like you're saying. When our babies are little, I remember this very distinctly from my early days as a mom. I remember crying to my own mom that I couldn't do it, with the baby. And she said to me, like, are you feeding the baby? Yes. Are you keeping him clean? Yes. Are you holding him when he cries? Yes. She said, you're doing it. You are doing it. That's it. And we, you, me, our listeners, we met the physical needs of our little baby. Whether or not we felt lovey dovey in our hearts, right? Whether or not it was pretty as the picture that we had envisioned, we did it. And that was like a perfect mother in that moment. And then as our children grow, not meeting every one of their needs perfectly is vital to their being able to develop independent skill. Not being perfectly attuned to every one of their little emotional outbursts is vital, right?
Preach.
And it also is the opportunity for rupture and repair, which means
Yes.
not getting it right and fixing it, which is not just allowable in secure attachment, it's vital to secure attachment. And so, if you've been sitting and listening to us talk about those early experiences, the pressures that are here on us from our society, the pressure that comes from within, and then even the pressure that we felt personally in those early days of motherhood to be perfect, I feel like we were always falling short, and you recognize that in your own self. I want you to chew on the idea of being a good enough mother. That it's not only allowable, but that it's vital. That this is the job to be good enough. Today, as we head towards Mother's Day, the thing that I want our listeners who are moms to know is that you're not a bad mom. And maybe this joke isn't serving you that well. I mean, I'm still going to make it. I'm 100% going to make it. I'm going to make it for trivial things, right?
Yeah.
As a
Silly
way to,
things.
yeah, as a way to call out the ridiculousness of our culture and what it expects of us, right? And our children and what they expect of us. Whatever, man. I'll still make the joke. But if you feel that way, if you fear that you're a bad mom, that you're not good enough, we want you to know that it's not true. You are absolutely a good enough mom. That's all you've ever needed to be. Don't need to be perfect at all. You're exactly the right mom for your kids. This is who they needed. You were the one who was chosen. And you don't have to get everything right to be good. I'm so looking forward to continuing this conversation in our Facebook group. It's where we're going to hang out because there's so much connection and healing that needs to happen around this topic. And until then, I hope that this episode has helped you to start to think about where these ideas came from and to really be able to critically challenge them so that you can get some relief and a little bit more joy in your motherhood.